This prince, like us when we were young, fantasized about living forever. His father advised him to abandon this fantasy and face reality. Just inherit the throne and be done with it. This prince was also going through a rebellious phase. He stomped his feet, insisting on seeking an eternal kingdom. Seeing that he couldn't persuade his son, the old father let the prince go out and do what he enjoyed. The prince made his preparations, shouldered his pack, and walked for years. He arrived at the foot of an immensely high, steep mountain. He split his crown in two and attached them to his shoes, creating a pair of climbing boots. Then, he spent several more years, finally reaching the mountain's summit. There, he discovered a giant toiling away. The prince greeted the giant in a friendly manner, and the giant returned his greeting. Upon learning of the prince's purpose, the giant revealed that this place was indeed the land of immortality, and the ruler of the immortal land was a beautiful queen. Hearing it was a queen, the prince immediately became interested, wanting to have an in-depth discussion with her about the way of immortality. The giant told the prince that by passing through the forest ahead, he could find the immortal queen. After the prince made his way through the forest, he indeed saw a magnificent palace. Entering the palace's great hall, the prince saw a woman embroidering. After the prince explained his purpose, the woman strongly urged him not to continue seeking the immortal queen, because to meet her, one must pass through 3 iron doors, each guarded by fierce beasts. But the prince stomped his feet again, insisting on having a deep conversation with the immortal queen. So, the kind-hearted woman gave the prince 3 specially made loaves of bread. When the beasts tried to attack the prince, he only needed to throw them some bread, and they would back off. Then the iron doors would open automatically, allowing him to meet the immortal queen. Upon seeing the immortal queen's true appearance, the prince immediately showered her with flattery. Having lived deep in the palace for so long, how could the immortal queen resist such temptation? Finally seeing a man after so long, she immediately unleashed her passion. From then on, the two were entangled day after day, year after year. Finally, one day, the prince felt his back was hurting too much, so he told the immortal queen that he wanted to go home to see his old father. Hearing this, the immortal queen became displeased. She told the prince that more than 3,000 years had passed, and the prince's old father was long gone from this world. However, the prince firmly believed that he had only been there for 2 or 3 years. The immortal queen didn't force the prince to stay. She even gave him a pair of shoes, then told him, after leaving this place, someone would attack him. He could pretend to submit at first, then put on these shoes to temporarily save his life. Afterwards, the prince shouldered his pack once more, and set out on his journey home. However, the outside world had long since changed beyond recognition. He asked many passers-by, but none of them knew his royal father. As night fell, the prince had no choice but to find a shabby room, and make do on some dry hay for the night. However, the next day, when the prince awoke, a faceless figure in white stood beside him. It turned out that in this world, the prince should have died 3,000 years ago. Death had searched tirelessly, finally finding him now. Seeing that this visitor meant him harm, the prince quickly put on the shoes the immortal queen had given him. The shoes immediately carried the prince away in flight. Death pursued relentlessly behind him, but was always a little slower than the prince. The shoes carried the prince to the immortal queen's palace. In front of the gates, the immortal queen shouted at Death, forbidding him from touching her man. Death was so frightened that he immediately halted his pursuit. Then, the immortal queen said to Death she would throw the prince into the air. If he fell outside the wall, then Death could do with him as he pleased. But if he landed inside the city, this man would belong to the queen. After the queen threw the prince into the air, Death still hopefully anticipated that the prince would land outside the city wall. This was a completely unequal treaty, with no randomness to speak of. Without a doubt, the prince landed directly in the immortal queen's back garden. Then, the queen even gave Death a beating. From then on, the prince stayed by the immortal queen's side, living a blissful life.